this morning. From the years 2011 to 2014, I spent most of my days on campus at George W. Truett Theological Seminary in Waco, Texas. I was there getting what would become my Master of Divinity degree, the standard degree for preachers, for pastors. And I've learned over the years that seminary has a cloud of mystery to it for people. People don't know exactly what it is that we do there. There's some that think, well, it's like trade school for pastors. This is where you learn how to do funerals, where you learn how to do baptisms, where you learn how to do hospital visits, where you learn the ins and the outs, the mechanics of being a pastor. And there's some truth to that. For others, they think, no, it's like Sunday school, but to another level. That this is where you go and you study the Bible day in and day out, and you really get down to the nitty-gritty so that when you walk out, you can answer any question anybody ever asks you about any part of the Bible. And would that were so, but that is not exactly the case either. It's a little bit of both, I think. But for a school like mine that's in the liberal arts tradition, what it's really about is not so much telling you what to do, telling you what to think, telling you what to believe, but rather it's about exposing you to the greatest of theological minds, the greatest of biblical scholars, to a wide variety of intellectual inquiry, so that you then can make these determinations, so that you will know how to study Scripture, so that you will know then how to interpret and exposit God's Word, and ultimately so that you will know what you believe. It's 3 years of biblical and theological and spiritual exploration. But at the end of all of that, there came this one course, a capstone course. And this class was about putting all of those things together so that when you left, while you would still have your questions, while you would still have things you needed to learn, you would nevertheless be able to state, for, say, a search committee, what it is you believe. So that when you stand before a congregation, you wouldn't stand before them saying, I'm not really sure about all this, but rather you'd have some answers to go with your questions. And so every single day in this course, we wrote what the professors called a confessional brief, where we were asked a very basic question about the Christian faith. And in 3 to 4 pages, we had to answer this question and then read our brief to the entire class. Questions like, what is salvation? Questions like, why is Jesus important? Questions like, what is baptism and what is the Lord's Supper? Things that most of us could have answered when we came into seminary, but now that we had this flood of new knowledge, we now had to answer once again. We'd asked the questions, we'd entertained the viewpoints, and now it was time to state clearly and concisely what we believed. Because there comes a point when you move from seeking out answers to settling upon answers. A time when curiosity gives way to commitment. When you move from doubt to decision. When you have to say in a crystal clear manner, this is what I believe. Our passage from Mark this morning ends with just such a statement, just such a moment. And this morning's message will as well. See, we've read a lot of Scripture this morning, and indeed over the last couple of months. And in these nearly 8 chapters that we've made our way through, we have been thoroughly introduced to Jesus. Mark has done a good job of showing us the ministry of Jesus. We've seen John the Baptist prepare the way for Jesus. We've seen him announced as somebody special both by God and by Satan. By God at the baptism of our Lord, when a voice from heaven said, "This is my Son, the beloved. With him I am well pleased." And by the enemy in the wilderness, when Satan spent 40 days tempting the Lord, trying to divert him from the path God had placed him upon. We've seen Jesus call disciples. We've seen him proclaim the good news that the kingdom of God is at hand. We've seen Jesus cast out demons. We've seen him heal every kind of disease. We've seen him embraced by the common people, even as he's rejected by the religious and the political elite. We've seen a lot of Jesus. And yet what's interesting about Mark's gospel is that up to this point, the only time that the writer of this gospel, presumed to be John Mark, the only time when he has told us what he thinks about Jesus was in the very first verse. Chapter 1, verse 1. The beginning of the gospel of Jesus, the Christ, the Son of God. From that point onward, we've watched this story unfurl. And you, the reader, you, the listener, have been left to make up your own mind, to put the pieces together yourself, to answer the same question that the disciples were asked here in chapter 8. Who is Jesus? That's our question this morning. That's where we'll be spending our time. That's what we've been singing about all morning and what we've read about in these verses. Who is Jesus? And so if you've got your Bible this morning, we're going to be all over these two chapters. Needless to say, we're not going to go verse by verse this morning, but we are going to hit the highlights to be sure. So Mark chapter 6, if you want to turn there in your Bible. And the first of these highlights that I want to hit upon is arguably the most popular miracle that Jesus ever performed. The only one, other than the resurrection, that shows up in all four of the Gospels. The feeding of the 5,000. This is where Jesus, having been teaching before a large crowd, has compassion upon them, realizing that they're probably getting pretty hungry at this point after listening for so long. And he asks his disciples, don't they have anything to eat? They say, no, nothing. And so Jesus takes 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, and with this meager offering, feeds 5,000 men. I remember the first time I ever read the Gospel of Mark straight through, I was astounded by what happened next, because I'd never picked up on it until I read the Gospel straight through, which is that the fun doesn't stop there, because he does it again on the very next page. Did you notice that this morning? Very next page, chapter 8, verses 1 through 10. This time there's 4,000 people. And this time there's 7 loaves of bread to go with 2 fish. But same song, second verse. Jesus once again miraculously feeds this vast crowd with just a little bit of food. On top of these miracles, chapters 6 through 8 give us 3 more miraculous healings to go with these miraculous feedings. It's in 7:24 through 30 that Jesus honors the faith of a Syrophoenician woman, the persistent faith that she brought before him, and cast a demon out of her daughter, even though she was not one of his people. It's in the very next story, verses 31 through 37 of chapter 7, that Jesus heals a man who is both deaf and mute. And in chapter 8, 22 through 26, heals then a blind man at Bethsaida. These are his public miracles that we find in these 2 chapters. And there's a private one as well. Because in chapter 6, verses 45 through 50, the disciples and they alone get a glimpse of something unlike anything they'd ever seen before. They're out on a boat on the Sea of Galilee, and all of a sudden they see this figure coming toward them, and they think it's a ghost at first because this figure is walking on top of the water. And it's only then that they realize it's Jesus. A lot of miracles in these chapters. A lot going on here. So many miracles, so many wonders, so many signs that you almost get kind of numbed to the wonder of it all. But you know who wasn't numbed to it? You know who didn't just get used to it after a few verses? The people who saw these miracles. That's why in chapter 7, verse 36 and 37, when Jesus commands them not to tell anyone, the more he did so, the more they kept talking about it. People were overwhelmed with amazement. Even for his disciples, those who were with him the most, it's the same, because after this miraculous walking on the water, he climbed into the boat with them, chapter 6, verse 51 says, and the wind died down, and they were completely amazed. That word shows up more than just these two times in these chapters. There's this common theme of amazement. Because people don't necessarily know what to make of Jesus, but they know this much. He's interesting. He's fascinating. He's captivating. And that's where it stops for some people. Because for some, Jesus is simply an attraction. I'll say that again. For some, Jesus is an attraction. My wife and my kids love to travel, which means that I travel a lot. I tell people often that if I'm not in the pulpit, I'm probably not in the state on any given Sunday morning. And when we travel, we try not to go to the same places over and over again. There's one or two exceptions to this rule, but by and large, we want to go to a different place every time. And so in our various travels, we've seen some of the world's great wonders and some of our nation's great wonders. We've seen the Eiffel Tower in Paris. We've seen the Colosseum in Rome. We've seen the Western Wall in Israel. We've seen the Grand Canyon, and will again soon next month. We've seen the Space Needle in Seattle. We've seen the monuments on the National Mall in D.C. And the thing is, when you see these wonders of the world, these amazing things that people will travel from hundreds of miles away to visit, everybody pretty much has the same reaction. You ooh and you ah. You take your photos and your selfies. You read the little placards there in front. And then you leave. You walk away. And at a fundamental level, at an essential level, most of the time you're pretty much unchanged. You've seen something cool, now on to the next thing. Because these sights are interesting and they are amazing and they attract you to them. But once you've seen them, it's on to the next attraction. For some, in the day that this gospel was written and today, that's where it starts and stops with Jesus. He's an attraction. He's appealing. He's interesting. He's worthy of further research. But he amazes you in the same way that a monument or a natural wonder does. You'll show up on Sundays. You'll attend the occasional Bible study to learn a little bit more. But by and large, it's an intellectual exercise or an emotional attachment. If Jesus is simply for you an attraction. That's a good place to start. But like training wheels on a bike, it's a starting point, not a finish line. Because Jesus is more than just an attraction. Let's continue on here in the gospel. I mentioned at the outset that Jesus had drawn the ire of the religious elite, the scribes, the Pharisees, the teachers of the law. So much so that back in chapter 3, verse 6, Mark told us that they had actually begun planning to kill Jesus for the things that he was saying and doing. Well, he does himself no favors here in these chapters. Because in chapter 7, verses 1 through 23, the Pharisees have a question for him. Why don't your disciples, why don't your followers, your friends, why don't they live according to the tradition of the elders instead of eating their food with unclean hands? Why aren't they practicing the same rituals that we're practicing to make sure that they are clean before God and men? And Jesus calls them out. Quotes from Isaiah saying, these people, talking about the Pharisees and the scribes, these people, they honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They worship me in vain, and their teachings are just rules taught by men. And he goes on to explain to them that faith is not so much about what is on the outside, but what is on the inside. That nothing outside a man can make him unclean by going into him, but rather it's what comes out of a person that makes him or her unclean. It's based on encounters like that one with the teachers of the law that Jesus tells his disciples in chapter 8, verse 15, to watch out for the yeast or the leaven of the Pharisees and of Herod, of the religious elite on the one hand and the political elite on the other. He uses this metaphor of yeast in reference to the feedings of the 5,000 and the 4,000. And he uses it to talk about that which permeates and changes the whole lump of dough, completely alters its character, because that's what yeast does to a lump of dough. And that's what the Pharisees have done to the people. So what's the problem exactly with these folks? With the Pharisees, with the scribes, with the teachers of the law? Well, on the one hand, it's their approach to the written and the spoken word of God. They don't see it as enough. They feel a need to add on to it, building a fence around it in such a way that it's their will being done and not the Lord's, in such a way that they are showing reverence for the letter of the law while ignoring its spirit. And then on the other hand, there is their approach to the Word made flesh, their approach to Jesus himself. Because for them, like for some today, Jesus is a problem. For them, like some today, Jesus is a problem. We have anybody here that likes to work puzzles every now and then? I can't say that I'm one of those folks. I get too frustrated too quickly. But there's something that happens when you're working on a puzzle, and every single one of you are going to know what I'm talking about here. It's where you're looking for this one little piece that goes in just the right spot, and you pick up one thinking that you found it, and so you put it down to put it in its spot in the puzzle, and when you put it there, it's just a little off. You know, it's probably still the right piece, but when you try to fit it in there, you're having to work a little too hard. And there's a little gap there in the top corner, and no matter how hard you push down, you see the piece starting to bend a little bit in just the wrong way, and the more you try to jam it in there, the more frustrated you get. And the clearer it becomes that this piece doesn't go where you thought it does. Ever since the days of the scribes and the Pharisees, people have been trying to fit Jesus into a place where he doesn't belong, to jam him into their own perception of who he ought to be. to shove him into a box of their own construction. So some will say, Jesus, if you want to know who he is, he's a wise teacher. He's a spiritual guru of sorts. And they limit him to that. Others will take the opposite tack and say, no. He's a heretic is what he is, a charismatic heretic who managed to get some followers around him and start this big movement, but he was against the things of God. You'll have some that'll say, no, he's a revolutionary, calling people to liberation, calling the oppressed to rise up by whatever means necessary. And then on the other hand, some will say, no, you're all wrong. He is a more moderate figure who's trying to maintain the status quo and just have us all get along together in a kumbaya kind of fashion. And the more people try to jam Jesus into a category where he doesn't belong, the more frustrated they get. And the more he starts to become a problem. Because if Jesus won't fit into any of our categories, what are we supposed to do with him? It's really only two options for one who says that he is the Son of God. You're going to have to crown him or crucify him. Just a few more pieces of these chapters to look through. Let's return to the crowds who were following Jesus everywhere that he went. We've talked already about one of the motivations that brought him to his side, this sense of curiosity and wonder. They were attracted to Jesus. But there was something deeper, I think. Need. Look at chapter 6, verses 54 through 56. As soon as they got out of the boat, people recognized Jesus. And they ran throughout that whole region and carried the sick on mats to wherever they heard he was. And wherever he went, into villages, towns, or countrysides, they placed the sick in the marketplaces. And they begged him to let them touch him, to touch even the edge of his cloak. And all who touched him were healed. They begged him, it says. You see that same thing in the insistence of the Syrophoenician woman in chapter 7, verse 26. The woman was a Greek born in Syrian Phoenicia, and she begged Jesus to drive the demon out of her daughter. See the same thing in the 32nd verse of that same chapter. There were some who brought to him a man who was deaf and could hardly talk, and they begged him to place his hand on the man. You see the same thing in chapter 8, verse 22. They came to Bethsaida, and some people brought a blind man and begged Jesus to touch him. There's a desperation to these people, a desperation that you don't find in the casually curious and you don't find in the outright opponents. These people have a need, and they think Jesus can help. These people have a need, and they hope that Jesus can do something about it. For them, Jesus is the solution to their problem. Because for some, Jesus is a prescription. And of our three groups, attraction, problem, prescription, this one doesn't sound so off base, does it? I mean, Jesus gives us something we need. We call him our salvation. We call him our reconciliation. We call him our help. We call him all of these things that indicate that he brings something we need, that he fulfills a role we need him to fulfill. So is it so wrong to think of Jesus as a prescription? Well, here's the thing about a prescription. Here's the thing about regarding Jesus simply as a solution to your problem. When it comes to prescriptions, once you're not sick anymore, you stow away the medicine. Once you've gotten over what ails you, you throw away the pills. Your need has been met, and you don't really need that anymore. Well, there are some in the gospel stories who are healed by Jesus and then commit to follow him for the rest of their days. I'm certain that there are many more who received their healing and then moved on, went on with their lives. And there are some today who have that same kind of mindset, that Jesus is the cure for what ails you. But he's more than just that. He is more than simply moral medicine. He is more than just a spiritual antibiotic. He is more than just a prescription for your soul. So back to the big question then. If he's not just an attraction, if he's not just a problem, if he's not just a prescription, then who is he? Who is Jesus? Some apparently were saying that he was John the Baptist come again. We know King Herod thought so. Some are saying, he's Elijah come back. Elijah had ascended into heaven without dying, and now he's come back. Some were saying, no, he's one of the prophets, just another in the long line from Isaiah to Jeremiah on through the 12. But there at Caesarea Philippi, Jesus asked the question. That's what people say. That's what the crowds are thinking. That's what others believe. Who do you say that I am? And Simon Peter, the most outspoken of the disciples, the one always quick to say something, whether it's right or wrong, Simon Peter is the first one to say what is our confession of faith today. You are the Christ. You are the one who has come to fulfill the plan of God. You are the one who has come to save us from our sinfulness. You are the one who has come to usher in the kingdom of God, to right the wrongs of this world. You are the one who has come to bring us eternal life. You are the one we have been waiting for. What we're going to see in the next few weeks is that Peter didn't know how right he was, and Peter didn't know how much he still didn't know. Because Jesus is so much more than we think he is. Jesus is so much greater than we give him credit for being. He is our friend, as we've sung this morning, but he's also the Alpha and the Omega, the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. He is our joy. He is our love. Jesus is the song, but he's bigger than that. He's our hope. He is the truth and the life. Jesus is the one who fulfills the plan and the will of God. The one who is making all things new. The one in whom our souls find salvation and in whom our souls find rest. He is our hope. He is our peace. He is our joy. He is our love. And on an old rugged cross, he gave all he had to give. He gave his very life so that we could be saved, so that we could know eternal life with God. There's a lot of ideas about who Jesus is. A lot of thoughts about what he represents. And I don't know what your 3 to 4 page confessional brief would say if I made you write one right now. But this is a good place to start. Who is Jesus to you? May we start with that simple confession. You are the Christ. Let's bow together.